When I first bought my property out in the countryside near Willow Creek, Texas, I thought I had finally found paradise. 6 sprawling acres, no neighbors breathing down my neck, no petty rules about the color of my shutters or whether my grass exceeded some arbitrary height limit. It was freedom, pure and simple. The nearest neighborhood was a good half-mile down the road. Sunny Heights, a perfectly manicured HOA-ruled utopia. I barely gave it a second thought. They lived their way, and I lived mine. Or so I thought. The first time I met Karen Malone. It was a Saturday morning. I was replacing a section of my old wooden fence, sweat dripping down my forehead, when a shiny white SUV pulled up uncomfortably close to my property line. Out stepped Karen, a short, severe woman in a tailored pantsuit with a neon Sunny Heights HOA president badge pinned proudly to her chest like she was the sheriff of the entire county. She had a tablet tucked under her arm like it was a holy relic. "Good morning," she called out in that overly sweet tone that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "I'm Karen, just doing a community check-in." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Morning. Can I help you?" She didn't even blink. Her eyes scanned my property like a drone, pausing judgmentally at my tractor parked near the barn and the not-so-freshly mowed grass around my pond. "Just so you're aware," she said, tapping on her tablet, "properties within 3 miles of Sunny Heights are strongly encouraged to maintain visual harmony with our community standards. Uncut grass, visible agricultural equipment, and non-neutral fence colors can negatively impact property values." I stared at her, incredulous. "Lady," I said, trying to keep it civil, "this property isn't part of Sunny Heights. I don't belong to any HOA. Karen smiled, the kind of smile you'd give a toddler who just drew on the walls with crayons. "Well, we're all part of the greater community, aren't we? It reflects on everyone." I chuckled dryly and went back to hammering nails. I figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. The following week, I found a professionally printed notice duct-taped to my mailbox. Friendly reminder. Please cut your grass to community standard height, 3 inches maximum. Next came the complaint about my barn roof being an eyesore from the scenic Overlook Trail, a trail that, mind you, was half a mile away and mostly used by local teenagers for drinking on weekends. I started seeing her SUV idling suspiciously near my driveway, phone in hand, no doubt snapping pictures of my violations. Once she even had the nerve to leave a pamphlet on my porch about the importance of conforming aesthetics for neighborhood pride. It would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic. I ignored her at first. After all, a crazy neighbor wasn't my problem, not when I had a legal deed confirming my complete independence from Sunny Heights. But ignoring Karen only seemed to encourage her. Over the next few months, her polite notices became outright demands. She wanted me to repaint my mailbox, beige is preferred, move my tractor out of sight, and install appropriate shrubbery to soften the view from the road. The final straw came when she stormed onto my front porch one evening, brandishing her tablet like it was a court summons. My wife, Sarah, was inside fixing dinner. The kids were finishing their homework, and here was Karen raving about community cohesion and threatening to file formal complaints with the county if I didn't correct my property. That night, sitting on the porch swing with a cold beer, I realized something important. Karen wasn't just annoying. She was a ticking time bomb. And sooner or later, she was going to explode. It was one of those rare, perfect evenings, the kind where the Texas sky burns orange and purple, and the cicadas hum a lazy chorus through the trees. Sarah had just set dinner on the table. Our 2 kids, Jake and Emma, were arguing playfully over the last slice of cornbread. The smell of grilled ribs still hung thick in the air, and for the first time that week, I let myself relax. I was mid-sentence, telling a story about some ridiculous thing that happened at work when it happened. First came the screeching tires, a terrible, unnatural sound that sent a jolt of fear straight through my chest. Then the thunderous crunch of wood, brick, and glass shattering all at once. The entire house trembled under the impact as if a bomb had gone off in the living room. For a second, nobody moved. The kids sat frozen, wide-eyed. Sarah's hand clutching the back of her chair like it was the only thing tethering her to the earth. My heart slammed against my ribs as I launched myself from my seat, nearly knocking the chair backward. "Stay here!" I barked, adrenaline already screaming through my veins. I bolted through the hallway, shards of drywall and debris littering the floor, the air thick with dust. My boots crunched over glass as I reached the front door, yanked it open, and what I saw nearly made my brain short-circuit. There, embedded halfway into the front wall of my house like some deranged trophy, was a white SUV. Smoke hissed from the crumpled hood. One of the porch columns leaned at a sickening angle, looking ready to collapse at any second. And behind the wheel, gripping it with white-knuckled fists, sat Karen Malone. For one surreal moment, we locked eyes, me stunned and seething, and her wide-eyed and frantic, like a cornered animal. Before I could even shout, before I could process the insanity of it, Karen jerked the gear shift into reverse. With a howl of protesting metal and a shriek of tires ripping into my once pristine lawn, she tore the SUV free from the wreckage, ripping up flower beds and leaving deep gouges in the soil. "Hey!" I roared, stumbling down the porch steps after her. What the hell? But she didn't stop. She swung the SUV around in a wide, reckless arc across the yard, fishtailing mud and debris into the air like a tornado, then peeled out onto the road, disappearing into the night with only the fading red glow of her taillights and the choking dust cloud to mark her escape. For a long moment, all I could do was stand there, chest heaving, fists clenched so tight my nails bit into my palms. The sickly smell of burning rubber and snapped wiring filled my nostrils. My beautiful home, the one I'd poured my heart into, was bleeding bricks and wood and insulation onto the front lawn like a wounded animal. I stumbled back inside, rage and disbelief fighting for dominance inside my head. Sarah met me in the foyer, clutching the kids to her sides. Emma was crying softly. Jake kept asking, "Dad, what happened? Dad, are we safe?" Safe? My mind reeled. A lunatic had just rammed a 2-ton vehicle through our living room and then fled like a coward. No, we were not safe. Not as long as that woman thought she could terrorize us without consequence. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling with fury, and called 911. My voice cracked as I gave the dispatcher the details: vehicle description, driver name, direction of flight. They promised an officer would be en route immediately. The second I hung up, I made a decision. A cold, bone-deep promise to myself. This wasn't just a freak accident. This was war. Karen Malone had crossed a line she would regret for the rest of her miserable life. I didn't have to wait long before the circus arrived. Barely an hour after I called 911, flashing blue and red lights lit up my driveway like a twisted Christmas display. 2 police cruisers rolled to a stop at the edge of the torn-up yard, crunching over broken shards of wood and bits of my wife's now-destroyed rose garden. I moved toward them, heart pounding with righteous anger. Finally, someone would hold Karen accountable, but then I saw who stepped out of the third vehicle, a sleek Blacktown car, and my gut twisted into a hard knot. Karen Malone. She emerged wearing the same pristine white blouse from earlier, now rumpled and smudged with dirt. Perched beside her was a tall, stone-faced man in a sharp gray suit, the kind of guy whose tie probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Karen clutched a stack of papers to her chest like they were sacred texts, her lips pressed into a line so thin it practically disappeared. 2 officers approached me, but before they could say a word, Karen practically shoved her way in between us, waving a document in one hand like a queen issuing decrees to her subjects. "Officers," she said in a trembling but oh so virtuous voice, "I demand you arrest this man immediately." My jaw dropped. I actually blinked, convinced I must have misheard. She continued, voice rising with theatrical fervor. "He stole my vehicle. He broke into my property, took my car, and then he crashed it into his own house in some deranged attempt to frame me." The officers exchanged skeptical glances, but her lawyer stepped forward smoothly, handing over the paperwork. "Here's her statement of theft, filed just under an hour ago," he said, oozing confidence. We have reason to believe Mr. Mitchell unlawfully removed Mrs. Malone's vehicle from her garage and engaged in reckless endangerment. I couldn't even form words. My brain sputtered uselessly against the sheer absurdity being spewed into the air. "You're kidding me," I finally choked out. "You're actually serious with this crap?" Karen's lawyer gave a tight, polished smile. "Sir, I would advise you not to make any further statements without counsel present." One of the officers, a younger guy, early 20s, badge gleaming under the porch light, looked uncomfortable. He shifted from foot to foot like he could feel the absurdity radiating from the situation. "We need to ask you to come with us for questioning," he said, voice low. "Standard procedure." For one terrible moment, I actually thought they might cuff me right there, standing in the ruins of my own home, with my wife and kids peeking through the broken window in terror. Every cell in my body screamed at the injustice. Anger burned in my gut like wildfire, rising fast, white-hot, and blinding. I dug my nails into my palms to stay calm, to stay rational. I wasn't going to give Karen the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. "No problem," I said, voice tight as piano wire, "but you're going to want to see something first." They looked at me warily as I gestured toward the house, toward the recording equipment, toward the truth. Karen's smug expression faltered for the first time. She clutched the stack of papers tighter, like they could shield her from what was about to happen. And inside, despite the chaos and the rage boiling through my veins, a tiny spark of satisfaction flickered to life. Because Karen Malone had just bet the farm on the biggest lie of her life, and she was about to lose everything. I led the officers through the wreckage of my house, stepping carefully over debris. Dust hung thick in the air, catching in the light like tiny ghosts. The living room, once warm and full of life, now looked like a war zone, a jagged wound torn straight through the heart of our home. Every crunch of broken glass under my boots just fueled the fire roaring in my chest. We reached my workshop, tucked off to the side, thankfully untouched by the crash. Mounted high on the wall, humming quietly, sat my pride and joy, a full perimeter security system with motion-triggered cameras, a necessity out here in the country. Tonight, it would be my salvation. I powered up the monitor and cooed the footage. The room was dead silent except for the soft whirring of the machine. And there she was, clear as day, captured from 3 different angles. Karen Malone, staggering drunkenly to her SUV. No signs of force, no masked intruder. Just Karen herself, fumbling with her keys, slamming the door behind her, and screeching off into the night like a bat out of hell. I stabbed a finger at the screen. That's her. No theft, no coercion, just plain old bad decisions. The young officer's jaw actually dropped. The older one, mid-40s, stocky, seasoned, let out a low whistle and exchanged a meaningful glance with his partner. "We're going to need a copy of that footage," he said, voice carefully neutral, but tinged with something that sounded a hell of a lot like restrained satisfaction. "Gladly," I said, already pulling a flash drive from the desk drawer. But I wasn't finished. "Wait," I added, flipping to the next clip. They watched, riveted, as a second recording showed Karen's SUV barreling down my street, weaving recklessly. Another camera picked her up careening around the bend directly into my property. And finally, the most damning of all, the interior camera, which caught the sheer horror and wildness in her eyes as she tore through my front wall like it was made of paper. By the time the last clip ended, the room felt heavier somehow, like the truth itself was a physical thing, pressing down on all of us. The younger cop turned to Karen, whose smug composure had evaporated completely. She stood stiffly in the doorway, face pale, eyes darting wildly between us like a trapped animal. "Mrs. Malone," the officer said formally, "you're under arrest for filing a false police report, driving under the influence, destruction of private property, and reckless endangerment." Karen stammered, her mouth opening and closing like a fish yanked out of water. You can't. This is a misunderstanding," she gasped. But it was too late. The older officer stepped forward and clicked the handcuffs around her wrists with the kind of mechanical finality that felt like justice itself. As they led her stumbling toward the squad car, her high-priced lawyer scrambling uselessly behind her, I stepped out onto the porch, watching the scene unfold against the backdrop of my shattered home and my family's anxious faces peering out from inside. For the first time that night, the rage inside me cooled slightly, replaced by something sharper and more enduring: resolve. Karen had thrown the first punch. Now it was my turn to fight back, and I intended to finish what she started. The courthouse loomed large against the morning sky, its marble columns gleaming in the sunlight like sentinels of judgment. I sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, my suit jacket feeling too tight across the shoulders. Across the aisle sat Karen Malone, flanked by her new team of lawyers, no less polished but noticeably more desperate now. Karen herself looked like a ghost of the woman who once strutted across my lawn issuing demands. Pale, hollow-eyed, her hands clenching and unclenching nervously in her lap. When the judge entered, the room rose in a collective shuffle of chairs. I felt Sarah's supportive gaze burning into my back. I drew a breath deep into my lungs, steadying myself. This was it. This was where the real reckoning would happen. My attorney opened with a blistering summary: evidence of reckless endangerment, falsification of a police report, destruction of property, and emotional distress inflicted on my entire family. He played the security footage for the court, slow motion where Karen drunkenly staggered to her car, frame by frame as she plowed through my living room wall. Every time the footage replayed, I saw Karen shrink further into her chair. She looked like she was about to disappear inside herself completely. But the real gut punch came during witness testimonies. First, the neighbor from across the street took the stand, showing the grainy cell phone video he captured of Karen's white SUV roaring across my lawn like a rogue missile. Then came the corner store clerk, confirming she had seen Karen stumble out of the liquor store hours before the crash. The prosecution layered each account meticulously, like stacking bricks in an impenetrable wall. When it was Karen's turn to testify, the courtroom held its breath. She climbed onto the stand like a woman heading for the gallows. Her lawyer gave her a reassuring nod, but the confidence was paper-thin. Under direct questioning, Karen tried to paint herself as a confused, victimized woman. She mumbled about how she had been under stress, how she feared for her safety, how she barely remembered anything about that night. But under cross-examination, the mask shattered. My attorney leaned forward casually, like a man playing with his food. "Mrs. Malone, are you suggesting that security footage, eyewitness reports, and your own signed false police report are all misunderstandings?" Karen stammered, her voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to happen. I was scared. Scared enough," my attorney said smoothly, "to falsely accuse Mr. Mitchell of grand theft auto, attempt to destroy exculpatory evidence, and flee the scene of a major felony." Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. A ripple of whispered disbelief coursed through the courtroom. The judge rapped his gavel sharply. "Enough. I believe we have heard all we need." The verdict came swift and brutal. Karen Malone was found guilty on all counts. She was ordered to pay me $950,000 for damages, plus an additional $500,000 for emotional distress and punitive damages. Worse for her, the criminal charges stuck: 2 years in prison without parole for false reporting, DUI, and reckless endangerment. When the sentence was read, Karen broke down completely, sobbing into her hands, her whole body shaking under the weight of her disgrace. Her lawyers tried to console her, but she shrugged them off, dissolving into pitiful, incoherent cries. And me, I sat quietly, watching with a calm, steady satisfaction, not out of cruelty, but because justice, at long last, had been served. Karen had tried to destroy my home, my name, my family's safety, and now she had destroyed herself. After the verdict, it felt like a veil had been lifted from my life, like someone had finally opened a window in a suffocating room. The first order of business was rebuilding. I wasn't just repairing a wall. I was restoring the sense of safety that Karen had tried to rip away from us. The insurance payout covered the essentials, but I decided to go bigger: reinforced concrete walls, steel framing where wood once stood, and a brand new security system. One that could probably survive a zombie apocalypse if it came to that. Sarah and I picked out a beautiful dark stone facade for the house, giving it a rugged, timeless look. It wasn't just a restoration, it was an upgrade, a statement. We are stronger than anything you can throw at us. At the front gate, I installed a new iron fence with a plaque that made visitors laugh and double take. Warning: this property is resistant to weather, criminals, and out-of-control Karens. The neighborhood, once timid around me thanks to Karen's whispered lies, now treated me like a local legend. Cars would slow down outside the new fence. I'd sometimes spot people smiling, pointing, even snapping pictures. My property had become something of a symbol, the place where arrogance met its downfall. As for Karen, her life imploded spectacularly. Word spread fast. She was stripped of her HOA presidency, fined into oblivion, and eventually forced to sell her house to cover legal debts. The last I heard, she was serving her sentence, trying to adjust to a reality where no amount of smugness could buy her a reprieve. The HOA itself went through a brutal reorganization. Most of Karen's cronies resigned within a month, and the few who stayed were voted out in a landslide. They brought in outside consultants to rewrite the association's charter, this time emphasizing respect for property boundaries and individual rights. Imagine that. But perhaps the sweetest part was what happened with my neighbor Doug, the guy who had captured the crash on his phone that night. Before all this, Doug had been just another face in the crowd, a nice guy but quiet. After the trial, though, the town hailed him as a hero for helping expose the truth. Local businesses offered him discounts. The mayor himself invited him to a special community recognition dinner. Doug even got a little side hustle going, selling Property Rights Matter t-shirts online, with a cartoon Karen crashing into a brick wall. He sent me one as a gift. I wore it the day we finished rebuilding the porch. Standing there, beer in hand, the new house solid behind me, and the chaos of the past finally buried, I realized something simple but powerful. When you stand your ground against the wrong people, you don't just state yourself. You give everyone around you a reason to stand taller too. 6 months later, life had settled into a rhythm so peaceful it felt almost surreal. The house stood stronger than ever. The lawn was green and immaculate, and the iron gate out front had become a local landmark. People would still honk and wave when they passed, like we were old war buddies who'd fought the same battle and come out the other side laughing. One sunny Saturday, I decided it was time to properly mark the occasion. We threw a huge barbecue, not just for friends and family, but for the whole town. I rented a giant inflatable obstacle course for the kids, set up tables loaded with ribs, brisket, and pies, and even hired a local band to play country covers in the backyard. But the real centerpiece, a custom-made cardboard setup at the edge of the lawn. A full-sized mock-up of a white SUV crashing through a wall, complete with smoke effects. Over it hung a banner in bold red letters: Karen Crash Derby, take your best shot. Neighbors lined up, cheering as people hurled foam bricks at the cardboard car or posed for ridiculous photos pretending to be wrecking Karens. Doug, wearing his Property Rights Matter t-shirt, acted as the unofficial MC, handing out toy steering wheels as prizes. When it was my turn, I gave the foam brick a theatrical wind-up, nailed the SUV right in the driver's side, and raised my arms like I'd just won the Super Bowl. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Even the mayor showed up, making a speech about the triumph of good neighbors and common sense over tyranny and foolishness. That night, sitting around the fire pit with Sarah, the kids, and a dozen new friends, I realized something deeper than just getting justice. We had reclaimed not just our home, but our spirit. And somewhere out there, maybe in a small prison library or a mandatory anger management class, I like to think Karen was learning a little something about consequences the hard way. As the fire crackled and the stars spread out overhead, I raised my glass high. To resilience, I said. To freedom, Sarah added. And to fences sturdy enough to stop anything, even a Karen in a four-wheel drive, Doug quipped. We laughed until our sides hurt, the night echoing with a joy Karen Malone could never take from us again.